Good day to you, my dear students. I'm Sean Xavier Alquilita, and let's talk about utilitarianism. Should Batman kill the Joker? What do you think? If you were to ask the Dark Knight himself with his hard and fast no killing rule, he will say, "No, you won't. Not yet." Actually, in fact, he would say,
No, you won't. Not yet.
okay, so when you think about it, dude is pretty Kantian in his ethics. Regardless of what Joker does, there are some lines that good people do not cross, and for Batman, killing definitely falls on the wrong side of that line. Okay, so let's be real here. Joker is never gonna stop killing. Sure, Batman will have him thrown back in Arkham, but we all know that he's gonna get out. He always gets out, and once he's free, he will kill again, and maim and terrorize. And when he does, won't a little bit of that be of Batman's fault? Okay, so Batman has been in a position to kill Joker hundreds of times. He has had the power to save everyone from ever being a victim of the Joker again.
Understand? Have all these rules, and you think they'll save you?
Where are they? Where are they?
Choose between one life or the other. Seems right to be.
So if you have the ability to stop a killer and you don't, are you morally pure because you didn't kill? Or are you morally dirty because you refuse to do what needs to be done? So, ladies and gentlemen, my dear students, let's go to the another side of moral theory, and that is what we called it as utilitarianism. So why do I describe Batman as Kantian? Well, the school of thought laid out in the 18th century German philosopher Immanuel Kant, known as Kantianism, is pretty straightforward. More precisely, it's absolute. Kantianism is all about sticking to the moral rulebook. There are never any exceptions or any excuses for violating moral rules. And our man Batman tries his hardest to stick to his code no matter what. But there are other ways of looking at ethics, like instead of focusing on the intent behind our behavior, what if we pay more attention to the consequences? So one moral theory does this is what is called as utilitarianism. It focuses more on the results or consequences of our actions and treats intentions as irrelevant. Good consequences equal good actions. In this view, what is good consequence? Okay, so modern utilitarianism was founded in the 18th century by British philosophers Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. But the theory has philosophical ancestors in the ancient Greece, so ancient Greek thinkers such as Epicurus. All these guys agree that these actions should be measured in terms of the happiness or pleasure that they produce. After all, they argue that happiness is our final end. It is what we do everything else for. Think about it this way. Many things that you do for the sake of something else. Like you study to get a good grade, you work to get money. But why do you want good grades? Why do you want money? There are different answers we could give, like maybe we're seeking affirmation for intelligence, or the approval of our parents, or a degree that will give us a career we want. But why do we want a particular career? Why do we want approval? So we can stop asking questions, but ultimately our answer will bottom out in I want what I want because I think it will make me happy. That's what we all want. It's one of the few things everyone has in common, and utilitarians believe that is what should drive our morality. Like Kant, utilitarians agree that a moral theory should apply equally to everyone, but they thought the way to do that was to ground in it something that's really intuitive. There is really nothing more basic than a primal desire to seek pleasure and avoid pain. So it is often that utilitarianism is a hedonistic moral theory. This means the good is equal to the pleasant, and we ought morally to pursue pleasure and happiness and work to avoid pain. But utilitarianism is not what you call an egoistic theory. Egoism says that everyone ought morally to pursue their own good. In contrast to that, utilitarianism is other regarding. It says that we should pursue pleasure or happiness not just for ourselves, but for other and for many sentient beings as possible. To put it formally, we should act always so as to produce the greatest good for the greatest number. And this is also known as the principle of utility. Okay, no one's gonna argue with a philosophy that tells them to seek pleasure. But sometimes doing what provides the most pleasure to the most people can mean that you have to take one for the team. It can mean sacrificing your pleasure in order to produce more good overall. Like, for example, it's your birthday and your family says you can choose any restaurant you want and you want to dine in a restaurant. So, the thing that could make you happiest is, for example, a Thai food. Wow, it's delectable, delicious meal. But you know that would make the rest of your family miserable. So when you choose Chinese, which is nobody's favorite, but everybody can make a do, and most of all that you can crack a jokes in the middle of the meal, then you've thought like a utilitarian. So in this case, you've chosen the action that would produce the most overall happiness for the group, even though it produced less happiness for you than the other alternatives that would have. The problem is, for the most part, we're all our biggest fans. We each come preloaded with a bias in favor of our own interests. This is not necessarily a bad thing. Caring about yourself is a good way to promote survival. But where morality is concerned, utilitarians argue as special as you are no more special than anybody else. So your interests count, but no more than anybody else's. Now you might say that you agree with that. I mean, we all like to think of ourselves as being generous and selfless. But even though I am sure that you are a totally nice person, you have to admit that things seem to be more important, weightier, higher stakes when they apply to you rather than to some stranger. So, utilitarians suggest that we make our moral decisions from the position of a benevolent and disinterested spectator. Rather than thinking about what I should do, they suggest that I consider what I would think if I were advising a group of strangers about what they should do. That way, I have a disposition of goodwill, but I'm not emotionally invested, and I'm a spectator rather than a participant. So let's put utilitarianism to the test. And here, there's a British philosopher, Bernard Williams, is trying to challenge utilitarianism through his book, A Critique of Utilitarianism. Here, 20th century British philosopher Bernard Williams offered this thought experiment. For example, Jim is on a botanical expedition in South America when he happens upon a group of 20 indigenous people and a group of soldiers. The whole group of indigenous people is about to be executed for protesting their oppressive regime. And for some reason, the leader of the soldiers offers Jim the chance to shoot one of the prisoners since he is the guest in their land. He says if Jim shoots one of the prisoners, he will let the other 19 go. But if Jim refuses, then the soldiers will shoot all 20 protesters. So, what should Jim do? More importantly, what would you do? What would you do? So Bernard Williams actually presents this case as a critique of utilitarianism. So the theory clearly demands that Jim shoot one man so that 19 will be saved. But Bernard Williams argues that no moral theory ought to demand the taking of an innocent life. Thinking like a Kantian, Williams argues that it is not Jim's fault that the head soldier is a total dirtbag, and Jim should have to get a literal blood in his hands to try and rectify the situation. So although it might be pretty simple, utilitarianism is really a demanding moral theory. So it says that we live in a world where sometimes people do terrible things, and if we're the ones who happen to be there and we can do something to make things better, we must, if that means getting our hands dirty. So, and if I sit by and watch something bad might happen when I could have prevented it, my hands are dirty anyway. So Jim, think about it as killing one man. That man was dead already, because they were all about to be killed. Instead, Jim should think of his decision as doing what it takes to save 19 indigenous people. And Batman needs to kill the Joker already. Now, if you decide you want to follow utilitarian moral theory, you had two options, specifically two of them. When Bentham and Mill first posed their moral theory, it was in a form now known as the what we call it act utilitarianism, sometimes called as classical utilitarianism. And it says that in any given situation, you should choose the action that produces the greatest good for the greatest number, period. But sometimes the act that will produce the greatest good for the greatest number can seem just wrong. For instance, suppose a surgeon has 5 patients, all waiting for transplants. One needs a heart, another a lung, 2 are waiting for the kidneys, and the last one needs a liver. The doctor is pretty sure that these patients will all die before their names come out on the transplant list. And he just so happens to have a neighbor who has no family, totally recluse, not even a very nice guy. The doctor knows that no one would miss this guy if he were to disappear. And by some miracle, the neighbor is a match for all of the 5 transplant patients. So it seems like even though this would be a bad day for a neighbor, an act utilitarian should kill the neighbor and give his organs to the 5 patients. It's the greatest good for the greatest number. Yes, 1 innocent person dies, but 5 innocent people are saved. This might seem harsh, but remember that pain is pain regardless of who's experiencing it. So the death of the neighbor would be no more worse than the death of any of those patients dying on the transplant list. In fact, it's 5 times less bad than all 5 of their deaths. So thought experiments like this led some utilitarians to come up with another framework of their theory. So this is what we called it as the rule utilitarianism. This version of this theory says that we ought to live by rules that in general are likely to lead the greatest good for the greatest number. So yes, there are going to be situations where killing an innocent person will lead to the greatest good for the greatest number. But rule utilitarians want us to think long term and on a larger scale. And overall, a whole society where innocent people are taken off the streets to be harvested for their organs is going to have a lot less utility than one where you have to live in a constant fear of happening to you. So, rule utilitarianism allows us to refrain from acts that might maximize utility in the short run, and instead follow the rules that will maximize utility for the majority of time. As an owner of human organs, this approach might make sense to you. But I still gonna say, if Batman were utilitarian of either kind, it would not look very good for the Joker. Okay, so today we learn about utilitarianism. We studied the principle of utility. We learned about the difference between the act and rule utilitarianism. So next time, we'll take another look of another moral theory, and that is what we call it as the theory of justice. So once again, I'm Sean Xavier Alquilita. Thank you very much.